Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining from. My name is Verena Knöll. I'm an associate mobility expert at Mobilize Your City Partnership, and I'm happy to welcome you to the 7th and final session of the Mastering Mobility series under the title Reflecting About Barriers and Co-Creating Solutions for Active and Walkable Cities. We started our Mastering Mobility series already 1 month ago, and you can see on this slide that we covered a lot of topics that are relevant for urban mobility so far. And today we have the finale of this series, and we are going to focus on active and walkable cities. First of all, I would like to give some general notes on the session. If you're not speaking, make sure that you are muted and your camera is turned off. That way, you're also not going to appear in the recording because the session is going to be recorded. So if you don't want to appear in the recording, don't turn your camera on, or you might have to leave the meeting if this is a problem for you. You can always include your questions in the chat, of course, and we will post them to the speakers. You can also share resources, material, anything that you would like us to know. And please be aware that this session is only available in English. There is no French translation, but if you're interested in our other sessions that were offered in English and French, you can go to our website and find them there. What is the session going to be about? In the session, we're going to dive into the benefits of active modes of transport for urban mobility. We're also going to identify concepts, approach, and tools towards increasing walking and cycling in your city. We're going to showcase some examples from the praxis on how it has been done in other cities so far. And then, of course, there's also room for you to exchange on barriers and for co-creating solutions. So we promised a highly interactive session, and we hope that we can live up to that expectations. But of course, that also will depend not only on us, but also on you as the participants, because co-creation really requires somebody else to do it. Here you can see our agenda for today. So what are we going to cover in the next 1.5 hours? So maybe I can remind you to mute yourself if you don't have anything very important to share with us. So after this opening and welcome, we will have the first input on what active mobility is actually about and why it is important. Before we will go into identifying barriers that you might also be currently facing in your cities. And then, of course, we don't want to stick too long with the barriers. We are also going to go straight towards the solutions, and we will hear what some other cities have already done in that regard. So we will have several case studies that will be showcased, for instance, one from Kochi in India. Of course, we also have some time for Q&A, so you can always post your questions in the chat, and if we have time, I will post them to the speakers. And then if you want to stay for the really, really interesting part, the solutions, you actually have to stay until the very end of the session, because that is when we are going to go to the interactive part and we're going to co-create solutions. So this is an exciting session that awaits us. And for the session, I'm supported by 3 very amazing guest speakers. First of all, we have Aimee Gauthier here. She's the Chief Knowledge Director at the Institute of Transport and Development Policy, also known as ITDP. We will also have here with us Chris Kost, who's the Africa Director from ITDP, and Vincent Licher, from the Director of Suez Consulting Mobilities, is going to share his work that he's done with his consultancy in Kochi in India. And then, of course, there's me. I already introduced myself. I will be moderating this session. So before we are going to dive into the topical inputs, I said this is going to be a highly interactive session. So please tell us in the chat where you are from so that we know who's joining us. And you can use the link that my colleagues are going to post in the chat, or scan this QR code to be redirected to a board that is going to guide us through the interactive parts of the session. I have a little bit of some explanations for you here, so that you're not completely lost when you go towards the board. You have 2 options to go there. You can either use the link, click on it, and then a window should open in your browser. Or you can use your phone. You can scan the QR code. If you use your phone, be aware that not the whole board is going to show up, but you have to use the filter option. So you can filter and go to the question 2. Because for this part, we're only going to focus on question 1 and 2. I hope that you can all access the board. I will ask my colleague to also share it so that we can see if there's already some activity going on there. But if you have any questions, please feel also free to share them in the chat so that my colleagues can help you if you have trouble accessing the board. So you can see that this is a rather big board, but we are only going to focus on question 1 and 2 for now, but I promise you we're also going to cover part 3 and 4 in the later parts of the session. So I would like you to tell me, when was the last time you used a bicycle as a mode of transport? You can choose among several options that we have here. And then the second question is all about what comes to your mind when you think about walking in your city. So maybe you can think about maximum 3 things that come to your mind when you think about walking in your city, and let us know here. I see that there are already some answers coming in, but you will still have some time. The board is open throughout the whole session, so we can go to it later on as well. For example, I used the bicycle as a mode of transport last time only yesterday, when my bus was not going all the way to where I wanted to go and I had to use a bike. I see that a lot of you also used a bike today. That is great. There's no one who never used a bike, so that is also pretty amazing. And then I'm going to check what comes in regarding walking in your city. So liberating, difficult, well, 2 very different topics here. No place to walk. Oh, that is sad. I'm sure we are also going to cover that when we come to the barriers later. A lot of energy, probably something that you get when you walk, so that's great. And then nice, yeah, flexible and engaging. There are a lot of options coming in. If you feel like, oh, I see there are also barriers already coming in. Some people are super active and already participating in the later parts. If you agree with a vote, with something that was posted by a colleague of yours, you can use the thumbs up. If you disagree, you can use the thumbs down, and you can also always use the answering function of this board to answer directly to something that has been posted by your colleague so far. So maybe if somebody wrote nice, you can say like, yeah, it's also nice, but in my city, maybe it's also very difficult. So this is kind of just a fun warming up exercise on how to use this board. As I said, we're going to come to it later on as well. So maybe now I can ask my colleague to go back to sharing the PowerPoint with us so that we can proceed with the topical part of this session. I will give you some time to put it up. The first part of this session is going to be held by Aimee Gauthier from ITDP, and she is going to, Yulia, can you go to her slides, please? She's going to talk about defining active mobility and understanding the importance. Aimee, have you already taken over control?
I've taken control.
Okay, so you might need to jump to your part then, but that's not a problem.
Sorry about that. I'm so excited about this option to take control of a PowerPoint that I just did it, so I apologize.
Sure, no problem. I can also just go to your part again.
Oh, I'm there, I think. Oh, no, that's still you. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll get
no
there.
No problem.
It's all good.
That's why we're so many people here supporting this session. So I think if you take over control now, you should be back to managing your part of the presentation.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's a real honor to be here, and I'm really excited to be talking about this. I like that this is the bookend of the series that Mobilize Your City has put together, because I do think that this is the foundation of sustainable transportation in the city. So really excited. Thank you, Mobilize Your City and Verena, for all of your patience, and we'll get started. Let's see. Do I move the slide? I did it. Okay. So basically, we're going to start with talking about why walking and cycling, why active and walkable cities, and look at some of the barriers and challenges. The first point is that, as I was just saying, walking is the foundation of a city. Everybody is a pedestrian at some point in their journey, even if they drive or use a motorcycle or use public transport. But more importantly, I think we see that walking is actually a very high mode share in many cities. So for example, this is an example from Rio, where 31% of the mode share is from walking and cycling, and that's probably an undercount. And what we see in many sorry, is everything okay?
I think you did not move the slides yet, so I took over control again. I hope that's fine. Is that the slide that you wanted to show?
No, I'm on the next slide. It shows in my screen.
Yeah,
as the
I think,
right.
I don't know, maybe there's a problem. You can just say next slide and I will move on for you then.
That's okay. Great. So in many Brazilian cities, we also see that there's a mode share of 30 to 40% for walking and cycling. So Rio's not an outlier. It's in fact maybe a little bit on the low side. Next slide, please. We also see this high mode share for walking and cycling, but mainly walking in African cities. So like this is an example from Nairobi, where 40% of the mode share is from walking, and Dakar, I've heard it's as high as 70%. So there's a very high mode share for walking. Next slide. And then what we also see, this in India, for example, this is an example from Chennai, where we see, I would say, about 31%, if I could do math, but anyway, 25% for walking and 3% from cycling. Nope, that's 28%. I can do math for walking and cycling. What this graph also shows is the green is 2008 and the blue is 2018. You see a declining mode share. Next slide, which is problematic. Another reason for supporting walking and cycling is that many trips in the city are short trips. Now, this data is from the US and Europe, but a majority of trips are under 5 kilometers, with 30% in Europe of car journeys under 3 kilometers. Those are distances that could be reasonably done on a bicycle. Next slide. The third thing, and these are just from kind of like mobility perspectives, the third thing is that walking and cycling are space and cost efficient. So the costs to the individual are much lower for walking and cycling, essentially free for walking. And the costs to the city are much lower to provide and maintain the infrastructure for walking and cycling as well. And then we also see that walking and cycling is space efficient. If the graph on the right is from TUMI, and it looks at the capacity of passengers per hour in a 3.5 meter wide lane, and walking and cycling has a high throughput, especially compared to mixed traffic. Next slide. Walking and cycling do not contribute to air and noise pollution, which is a big issue in cities. The global cost of air pollution is estimated at $2.9 trillion. We're also, more research is coming out talking about the impacts of air pollution on health and noise pollution on mental health, and especially for the cognitive development of children. I think we're just beginning to scratch the surface of how detrimental air pollution is to us. Next slide. Walking and cycling are inclusive and equitable. They're the most affordable forms of transport, and they're available for a lot more people, the older and younger alike. Kids can't necessarily drive and can't necessarily navigate transport systems, and older people may prefer to walk or not be able to drive as well. Next slide. The sixth reason why walking and cycling are great is that walking and cycling promote health and well-being. So you have so non-communicable diseases are killing 41 million people a year, which is 71% of all deaths globally, and 77% of those are happening in low and middle income countries. So by walking and cycling, you're getting some exercise, you're helping protect your health. I think there's also a well-being aspect to it. You are interacting with your community, you're interacting with your environment. And then the last piece of this is mental health, and that walking and cycling can help with mental health. Oops, I'm done. All right, next slide. I'm going to go really quick now. Walking and cycling generate more local economic development. In this case, if you're walking and cycling, you're more likely to stop in a store and purchase stuff. That's good for the business. It's good for the city's tax base. Next slide. They're also more resilient forms of transport. So we've seen this in the pandemic. Cycling came through as a really great way for people to travel around the city. We also saw that cycling, people were mobilizing around cycling for deliveries and for providing mutual aid and support. We see this in natural disasters. This is a picture from what happened in Mexico City after the earthquake. Cycling was one of the ways that first responders were able to actually navigate around the city. And then as we think about climate events, we're going to have to be able to respond flexibly and resiliently to extreme weather, extreme heat. And so we really need to look at walking and cycling as resilient forms of transport. Next slide. So really briefly on the barriers and challenges, many of you know this. This is just to queue up for our interactive sessions coming up. Next slide. What we see with the first kind of big barrier for walking and cycling is that our transportation planning focuses on the male, the non-disabled commuter, and the motorized trip. This is problematic because a lot of trips are made beyond the commute trip. As we see, like Segueras did research in Chile and Santiago that showed 47% of all trips were for caregiving trips. These are things like taking kids to school, going to the grocery store, going to doctor's appointments, going to visit relatives. And in the US, just 16% of all trips are for commuting trips. That means 84, if I do my math right, trips are for other purposes, school, health. So it's important to be thinking about the broader needs that you need to be planning for from a transportation perspective. Next slide. And just to note that you need to disaggregate by user and really understand how different people use different space. So this is Kisumu. And if we look at it by gender, we see that women walk more and take motorcycle bodas more than men. And I think that's actually reflective of a lack of access to money, to be honest. You can skip the next slide and we can go to the one after that. Next one. Just because I'm running out of time. So what this results in is street space prioritizing cars. Next slide. And what this shows is that, there'll be paved road, but there won't be sidewalks, there won't be cycle lanes. There's no space for walking and cycling, even though it is a pretty hefty mode share in most cities. Next slide. And when it is there, it's not well done. So it's either too narrow and you can't actually use it, or it's obstructed by utility poles, or it's poorly maintained. So as you see in all three pictures, in Recife, it's too narrow. The picture on the top right is from Nairobi, where it's obstructed, and then you have in Jakarta a sidewalk that is poorly maintained and obstructed. Next slide. And then what this space also gets encroached upon by vehicles. In the top right, we see a bike lane in Cairo that's been encroached by a vehicle. In the bottom right, we see vehicles parking on the sidewalk in Rio. And also things like freight delivery and informal vending, as you see in the bottom left. Next slide. Air pollution and noise pollution creates poor and unhealthy, stressful environments, especially from vehicular traffic. Next slide. And really critical are the crossings. They're chaotic and dangerous with fast traffic. It's not always easy to cross the streets. So these are really important things to consider when you think about walking and cycling. Next slide. And then another important piece is the land use side of it, the urban development side. You need to have places to walk to, and you need to have environments that are inviting. So in the bottom left picture, this is from Nairobi, you see that it's just gates and compound walls. There's nothing that you can walk to really. And you can see that also in the picture on the left from Fortaleza. Next slide. And I believe this is the last one. And finally, just to put a plug in for basic services, if you don't have good stormwater management, if you don't have good garbage disposal or sewage or a basic street network, those are going to compromise walking and cycling. So the picture on the left you can see in Rio with extreme rain and a lack of good stormwater management, people are walking in like half-high water. So those are kind of foundational for creating good walking and cycling access. And I'll stop there. Thank you, Verena.
Thank you very much, and perfectly in time still, so no worries. Thank you very much, Aimee, for that quick run through how important active mobility is, and also some insights on the barriers. We wanted to take some time to dive into this topic a little bit deeper, to reflect on the challenges and barriers that maybe in addition to the ones that Aimee, you just named, you're also experiencing in your work or in your daily life even. So you can go back to the board if you want. You can, again, use the QR code or the link and access it. I'm just quickly going to explain again, because we're going to focus on the third question now. So for those of you that are joining via phone, you might have to select the filter option and use the third question. Otherwise, you might be stuck with question 1 and 2. And I mean, you can also still continue to tell us about how walkable your city is, but we would also like you to join the discussion on the barriers. So while my colleague is moving us back to the board, I also want to encourage you, if you have anything that you want to share with us in the session, maybe a very good example, you can of course also always raise your hand and unmute yourself. But I see that there are also a lot of barriers already mentioned. I hope that later on we will be able to find solutions for all of them. That's at least the aim. Maybe we can try. So I'm just going to quickly go through a few of these, and you still have time to vote them up or down or add comments there. Yeah, not enough space. That is something that Aimee also just mentioned, or sometimes not enough space. Maybe it's just a space that is used by other modes, mainly by vehicles. Difficult with stroller pram. Yeah, for sure. That's also something that Aimee just mentioned, that we should also not only think about active mobility from, maybe just a male and person who can walk like normally perspective, but also think about more special needs, maybe a stroller and so on. The coexistence with other non-motorized modes, I think that is a very interesting topic that maybe we can also take on later. If we think about walking and cycling, do they maybe sometimes interfere, or might there be like challenges? Parking vehicles is also mentioned. Too narrow sidewalks got like 2 votes up. So that's something that's probably not a lot, that a lot of people are facing this challenge. Traffic speed, of course, road security can also be a very big issue and a barrier also for people to decide not to walk or to cycle. Maybe we can scroll down and see a little bit what else is coming up on the board. Oh, I see. Wow, so many barriers. Okay, I'll go on. Street design. Yeah, that is, we also heard about that just now. Pedestrian and continuous itineraries. Okay, I think maybe someone wants to elaborate a little bit more on that one. I have nothing in my mind when I read this, but you have the opportunity to either raise your hand and speak up, or you can post the answer in the chat, or you can also answer on the board. So many opportunities. Insufficient lighting. Yeah, of course, that's certainly something that is really, really important. Slippery surfacing. So I think there are a lot of barriers already coming in. Maybe Aimee, I was wondering from your experience and your work, what would you say is the most common barriers? Maybe also among the ones that you mentioned. I mean, they are probably all there, but the most important and most common barrier, what would you say?
I mean, they're all important, but I think the biggest one is the lack of space, or the space that's been encroached. I think that shows the priority on the street of what do you value, and if you don't have space for pedestrians, then you're not valuing pedestrians, and that forces people to move to other modes like cars and motorcycles, and bodas and tuk-tuks, because it's not safe to walk. So I think that there's a correlation there as well.
Okay. Would you say it's like the same barriers often for walking and for cycling, because we're kind of trying to cover all those modes, or is it something that is maybe specifically relevant for walking and not so significant for cycling? Or
no, I think one of the things that we see from research that's been done is if you provide safe and protected, mainly cycling lanes, that you'll see a lot of cycling, but safety is a much bigger concern for cycling than walking. To get people to take it on. So I think having the dedicated cycle lanes is equally important. I think cities are more open to walking than cycling, to be honest, in this moment. But maybe with the pandemic, that's changing a little bit. But I think with cycling, the biggest thing is the safety, that people feel safe using the cycling. And that's from having space for it as well.
Okay, thank you so much. I also see that there's a explanation on this board here, somebody who wrote a large comment, because you have been taught to use the car to go to the shop on the corner of the street. Yeah, sometimes it's also maybe convenience, but maybe not in all the cases, because there are also people, of course, especially in cities that I think you also, Aimee, were referring to, that actually don't have this choice of using the car because they maybe don't have a car. But of course, for some other people, that can also be a barrier. It's really a large range of what kind of barriers there are.
And I think when you talk about convenience, sorry to jump in, but like convenience is partly constructed, right? So the car convenience is something that has been constructed for a minority of people in a city. So most people, again, are not able to use cars and motorcycles. And the fact that the convenience has been weighted for that, like it's probably more convenient to cycle for a short trip, but because there isn't cycle lanes or bike parking, people don't feel safe doing it. So like I think when we think about convenience, it's about what we've constructed as convenient.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it could also be the case that walking to that shop would actually be way more convenient than taking the car, because maybe the place would not be accessible. Like, I mean, you can also plan a city in that way. But that already brings us to the solutions. And I mean, I certainly want to get there to the solutions, but I would also like to see if some new comments popped up here for the barriers. So maybe we can scroll down again, because I think, yeah, okay, wow. A lot of things. E-scooters blocking the path. Probably also a problem that is, it's probably restricted to certain countries where we have a lot of e-scooters. I certainly had that problem when I was walking home after taking the bike, and then I was walking. It was really like an intermodal journey yesterday. Accessibility, street design. Yeah, I think it's a lot of things that Aimee, you also covered. Maybe while I asked Julia to go back to our presentation, I also wanted to just use the time to ask in the participants if somebody wants to speak up. You always have the opportunity to raise your hand, so feel free to do so. You can also use the chat. I mean, you can always use the board. It's a very easy tool, but we also like to hear from you directly, of course, so don't be shy. But I see there is nobody who wants to say something, and I think we also have a lot of barriers that we covered so far. So Aimee, actually, if you want, you can try again to take over control. We can see if it works that time. I think you have to use the arrows that are directly under the slides if you want to move forward, so that everybody can see it. And I hope it will work this time. And you also, we made up some time, so you have some time to talk about solutions now.
Do you see the basic slide?
I still see what are the solutions. Maybe you have to another option.
Let me see. You're not seeing me move the slides?
The basics slide now, the basics.
Ah, okay, so maybe it's just me then.
Does the basics, a fine grained street?
Yeah, great.
Okay,
right.
So it's probably just an issue with my computer then. Okay, so you'll have to go on, and I will just look at the what are the solutions slide and try to figure out what is wrong with my computer today.
Awesome. So great, thank you so much. And thank you all for contributing to the barriers. I mean, I think, again, we all kind of face similar things, even though they're in very different contexts. So with the solutions, it's kind of a similar thing. There's kind of be some key principles to making walking and cycling better. And the first, again, this starts where I left off, is the basics. And that includes having a fine-grained street grid. So like in the picture on the bottom left, it's Guangzhou, which has a street network that also is intersected by pedestrian-only or cycle-only paths between those main roads. So that allows for a lot more connectivity for walking and cycling specifically. The other thing is, again, having your basic utilities taken care of, including water, sewage, stormwater management. And this is going to become increasingly important as we deal with, again, climate change and the climate crisis. We have to invest in these basic services because we're going to see flooding. We're going to see just a lot more intense events happening. The next slide, hopefully y'all can see. If you guys can't see it, just holler. But the next slide is dedicated protected networks. And I want to focus on networks because it's about being able to use these networks to reach the whole city. A lot of times people will put in like one bike lane that just goes along a main corridor, but doesn't really connect to anything. And so if you're really thinking about how people are moving through the city, they're usually not just on one main corridor. They're trying to connect to different parts of the city. So networks are really important. Protected is really important, especially for cycling. This picture on the left is from Mexico City of a protected bike lane. The picture on the right is from Rio, using bollards to protect the sidewalk space from encroachment. So that's both important. And just one more note about networks being important. In Fortaleza, they increased their cycle lanes by 280% to create a more connected network. And that resulted in a 153% increase in the number of cyclists, as well as when you invest in walking and cycling, which Fortaleza did, they saw a 40% decrease in their overall road crash deaths and injuries. So that's really impressive. Crossing in intersections, we mentioned this before, these are really critical tension points. It's where there's a lot of interaction and friction between different modes. So you need to make sure they're safe by design. Again, in Fortaleza, they did a tabletop crossing in the top left picture, which puts the pedestrian at grade so they don't have to go step down into the road space, the car space. But it's also great for accessibility and for people who have mobility constraints. On the picture on the right, this is from Pune. You see all the different components of making a safe crossing. You have bulb outs, which minimizes the crossing distance. You have bollards that protect from encroachment. You have at-grade crossings, the tabletop crossing, refuge islands between multiple lanes of traffic, traffic calming devices like tabletop, raising the cars having to come up slows them down, as well as different paving styles. And then thinking about cycling, how do you prioritize cycling in the intersection, make it visible to drivers and other modes is really important to do as well. They need to be sufficiently wide. A sidewalk for both cycling and walking. For a sidewalk, it's a complex system. There's a lot of activity that happens there. So you have the frontage zone, which is kind of the place of coming in and out of buildings. It may be places where there are stands. You have the pedestrian zone, which is where people will walk. It needs to be at least 2 meters, as the picture on the left shows. People travel with other people. So having the space for people to walk together, especially families or people in wheelchairs to pass each other, you need to have a sufficiently wide pedestrian zone. And I think a lot of times what we're saying is that it's not there. And when it's there, it's combined with the other 2 frontage and furniture zones. So the furniture zone is also equally important. It's a place to put things like trees or utility boxes or benches. It's a place for slowing down the activity, having places of pause. And those are really important in the sidewalk as well. And we also need parking for both people and bikes. I think it's really important that there is seating. If you're an older person walking, you may need to stop and sit more often than someone who's in their 30s. Same with traveling with a young child, and you also need to have places to park your bikes if you're riding a cycle. So when it all comes together, you have these wide, comfortable spaces. This is in Pune. There's a lot of shade, a lot of greenery. There's seating. It makes a walking environment really enjoyable. In Mexico City, they have protected bike lanes. That's also integrated with their bike share program. That's also located nearby their public transport system. So thinking about how all of these pieces intersect and interact. In Chennai, you have these really wide, well-lit, beautiful sidewalks, and lighting that came up as one of the barriers is really important, especially for people who may feel more vulnerable in public spaces, like women or families traveling together. So thinking about lighting is really important. The other piece that they have here is active frontages. They have like destinations and lots of places to walk to nearby. And this is in Nairobi, but again, having protected space, having shade from trees, having seating, again, having active frontages are all really important. Another thing that came up in barriers, which I was glad to see, is we need to slow down traffic, or traffic is too fast. So you can do that by reclaiming space. So it's essentially slowing cars down by design, because enforcement can be difficult. So you want to do it by design. So here in Buenos Aires, they extended the curb through bollards and planters. They put some seating there. It is a low speed zone, which you can see from the 20 kilometers per hour sign on the street. And Brazil and Sao Paulo, they also did it through reclaiming, extending the curve, creating a roundabout. So all of these things help slow down traffic. And another way to reclaim space is to just reclaim space for a different mode, like they did in Jakarta with a new protected bike lane. We're seeing a lot of this coming out of the pandemic. People putting in protected bike lanes, using what was previously car space. What we see on the right is from Belo Horizonte, where they just took excess space and created places for play with bright colors for the neighborhood residents. Destinations within walking and cycling distances are really critical. A lot of times people are forced to walk, and it's not because things are nearby, so they have to walk really long distances. So really thinking about the integration of land use with mobility is important. And then finally, one thing to think about is promoting walking and cycling too. Again, this is a reflection of things that you want to value and promote. Ways you can do that are through bike share. Bike share can be seen as an accelerator for cycling, giving people access that didn't previously have it before. Car-free days, like the picture on the right, and Bogota Ciclovia is a way to encourage people to reimagine and rethink what their streets could be if they were for walking and cycling. Tactical urbanism, of course, and then outreach and education. I just wanted to put a plug in here. A lot of times, especially from a gender perspective, women and girls don't have access to cycles when they're young, so they don't learn how to cycle. So the example on the left is Macleta, which is a women's cycling school in Santiago who helps teach women how to cycle and how to take care of their bikes. So these are all really important. So just to say that active and walkable cities are cities for the future. If we want to think about things like equity, road safety, climate change, what we need to invest in walking and cycling. I think with that, I'll pass it over to Chris, right?
Yes, you can pass it over to Chris.
Oh, but I think I just
Okay,
stopped
great.
presenting. And
I
It's
can actually
fine.
share from my side if
Sure, Chris, if you want to share your screen, you can do that.
Okay.
I can answer some of the questions that are in the chat while Chris is doing this.
Sure, go for it, Aimee.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But I don't have a lot of answers, Chris, so hurry up.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there are 2 questions in the chat, right? So
Yeah. So I think in terms of the indicators on how to measure growth of economic or cultural activity caused by active transport infrastructure, I mean, I think the key thing here is always to do before and after data. And what we've seen is that people can measure activity, whether it's like walking counts or cycling counts. But you just need to make sure you have the before information. And something that Fortaleza did really well is they kind of picked areas where they knew that they would have success with doing tactical urbanism. And then they were able to document that success. Like they knew that if they did this, that they would get a lot of cycling or a lot of bus counts, not bus counts, but bus time savings or even walking and walking activity. So you kind of do need to make that case, but you want to start with where you think they're going to be successes. The other thing that cities have done is used retail sales. And that's if you have strong economic reporting happening in your city. So like, if not, you can do survey work with the business owners too. Like I know in Times Square, when they did the pedestrianization, the Times Square Alliance, which was a business improvement district organization, they did a lot of work on understanding the impacts to the businesses in that area. And also there were some surprising impacts, like workers had an easier time getting to their jobs. So thinking about those kind of impacts are important as well. All right, I'll stop there.
perfect.
And with
Thank
that,
you,
we
Aimee.
can keep going. So thanks, Aimee. Great. So I'll pick up where I left off. So I was just starting to talk about the existing mode split in Kisumu. And what you can see here is that the distribution of trips is rather sustainable. You know, we have more than half trips by foot. There's a sizable mode share by bicycle and bicycle taxi. And we also have a lot of people using public transport. But if you look at the facilities that are available, this is what it looks like on many streets. You know, absolutely no walkways. There's a well-paved carriageway for the vehicles, but not a lot of facilities for everyone else, and especially caregivers and children having a lot of trouble. We mapped this out as part of the mobility plan that we helped the city prepare. And what you can see here is that there are very few of the streets in the whole city had footpaths on both sides. There are a few more that had a footpath on one side. And then if you filter that down to the streets that have at least 2 meters of clear width, and Aimee talked about the footpath zoning system and the need to have minimum space so that people like 2 wheelchairs can pass and you can handle the volumes, then there are even fewer paths in the city that meet that requirement. And if you further refine it to the number of streets that have footpaths that, where the 2 meters are clear, then it's even fewer. So there is definitely a need to improve the facilities. Another challenge has been that a lot of the streets don't have proper crossings, so especially outside school zones, this was a real problem. And the speeds were very high, and it was hard for people to move around. Same thing with cycling, lack of cycle facilities, people moving in mixed traffic. And the cycling is predominantly, young male risk-taking cyclists. And as Aimee was saying, if we continue to expect people to cycle in mixed traffic, we're not going to open this up to the full community. Another thing that was evident was a lot of the recent road projects had widened the carriageways, but they led to a lot of safety challenges. And so you can see in this case where there is a service lane alongside this newly expanded road, and the community had to come out and build a speed bump in it to get the speeds down and make it safe for kids to cross on their way to school. So these streets were definitely not safe by design, and that led to a lot of challenges for the communities. And then the construction quality was very poor, and so what the space that was supposed to be used by pedestrians had a lot of flaws like this. Drainage covers started to cave in, and so it really wasn't safe for people to move around. And that meant that these very corridors that had been upgraded in recent years actually became the epicenter of traffic crashes in the city. And so you can see this whole stretch here on this big highway that stretches through central Kisumu, seeing the majority of the fatal crashes over the years since the road was upgraded. So those are some of the key issues that the city had. And to help address this, ITDP and UN Habitat went to support the city in developing the Kisumu Sustainable Mobility Plan. And this plan outlined a comprehensive set of interventions dealing with all realms of mobility, from public transport to parking to land use transport integration. And one of the key elements was NMT, because given the city size and the fact that more than half of trips are either by foot or cycle, it was key to invest in this area. So the proposed NMT network that we developed, looked at those key issues like where are the black spots, where are the heavy volumes of pedestrians and cyclists that we need to accommodate with better facilities. And so we came up with this 100-kilometer network of improved walkways. And in addition to that, 31 kilometers of cycle tracks, so making sure that all the main arterial streets, including all the streets with with 2 or more lanes of mixed traffic per direction, would have cycle tracks. There are additional opportunities for greenways along the lakefront to serve as an alternative to the busier streets, and also to enhance the tourist potential of the city. And then the 28 kilometers of those new highways that are having a lot of safety challenges, so that was one of the key priorities. And then finally, improving safety in the school zones. So out of that network, even as we were preparing the mobility plan, the city embarked on this demonstration project to start upgrading the walkways. And so that was known as the Kisumu Triangle Project. It covered these 1.5 kilometers of streets in the city center. And here's the total cost is about 241 million Kenyan shillings, about $2.2 million at the time. And it was financed through a World Bank project where the World Bank actually gave a large loan to the government of Kenya. And then the Transport Ministry in turn gave out smaller grants to individual cities to implement these different types of urban development projects, including the Triangle Project. So it included a variety of interventions. So, the footpaths, but also better crossings, the street furniture. So there were a lot of new benches, landscaping, the drainage lines were overhauled because the city experiences a lot of flooding. It's barely higher than the level of the lake. So you really need to ensure that there's good drainage if you want these walkways to be free of waterlogging. And then finally, a nice element was that public toilets were included. We have a lot of issues with, equitable access to toilets in public space in Kenya. And so that was a nice element. And there were 2 public toilets that were introduced as part of the network. So there's a lot of community participation that went into this, going all the way back to 2016 with the first street design workshop. And bringing engineers out to see the streets, to understand the issues that pedestrians face and the really abject state of the existing infrastructure, and then brainstorming on solutions. And this was the result. The new wide walkways, they have enough space to accommodate the pedestrian movement, but also the economic activities that are happening in the city, and it really transformed the face of the town. You can see that there is a lot of care put into maintaining the existing tree cover, which was a big break from the way that road projects are normally implemented in Kenyan cities, because usually the first thing we do is we go in and cut all the trees, and then we have a blank slate to work from. But in Kisumu took a really different approach of maintaining these trees and actually customizing the design in each case to make sure that these trees could be preserved. And also paying attention to the surfacing and the finishing so that there's we have the universal access. Another key thing was making sure that the crossings get safer by implementing these raised zebra crossings with ramps for vehicles, and keeping the crossing at the same level as the medians and the footpaths so that people have a single surface all the way across. And it's actually steep enough for the vehicles to slow down. Okay, so it's not just an aesthetic intervention, but it's really ensuring better safety through the geometric design. And then finally, protecting the footpaths. So installing bollards, raising them above the carriageway so that there's adequate drainage, and making sure that these are there for the exclusive use of pedestrians, and we don't have a lot of encroachments from cars on the new footpaths. So that's the product of phase 1 of the NMT projects. And now the city is currently implementing the second phase, which has just over 7 kilometers of footpaths that are being implemented around the city. And the second phase also includes some cycle tracks. So we're hoping that this can become a good example of inclusive infrastructure and attract more engineers and planners from around the country to see how to build good facilities. So that's Kisumu. And then the next case study I want to get into is Addis Ababa, where the city's been making a big effort to invest in the walking and cycling environment, and that's been able to scale up those efforts, even beyond Addis to the national level. So, again, a lot of challenges, very few cycle facilities across the city. So people are left there to fend for themselves. Poor quality walkways, drainage issues, and in some cases the walkways are pretty decent, but they're just not big enough for the volumes of pedestrians who are there. So the city went about creating this Nmt Strategy. It was launched in April 2019, and the strategy is basically a 10-year roadmap for improving the Nmt environment. And then alongside the 10-year strategy, the city adopted this 3-year implementation plan that went into the specific projects and who should implement them, how much they're going to cost over that short period. And the city's now preparing its second round implementation plan, going forward. So, Addis, like many cities in the region, also has a huge fraction of trips by foot, and also by public transport. We only have 15% of trips by car. So again, a tremendous need to invest in NMT facilities. So the key planks of the NMT strategy, so having an excellent pedestrian environment, complete cycle network, looking at TOD, the elements like block size, building edges, making sure that contributes to a good pedestrian realm. Also implementing a modern bike share system, and then looking at parking management. And so the city is very aggressively tackling parking encroachments on the walkways. So here are some of the key targets. So 600 kilometers of footpaths, at least 200 kilometers of cycle tracks, the bike share system with a goal of expanding to 10,000 cycles over the 10-year period, and a number of other measures. And I'm gonna, in the remaining time, I'll get into the cycle planning in a bit more detail. So based on the NMT strategy, the city went on to develop a more detailed cycle network plan. And so it identified, you know, that there are already about 5 kilometers of facilities that were on the ground. And then it identified 60 additional kilometers that were already under construction. And then subsequent phases that would expand the network, make sure that there are cycle tracks connecting major residential areas to the city center where most of the jobs are, and also, you know, connecting schools, universities, and other key destinations. So from that network, the city's been looking at how to improve the design of the individual facilities. So, you know, going back to some of the early attempts to implement bike lanes, like this was the way that they were designed in the beginning. You know, a lot of challenges. So, you know, painted lane doesn't provide safety. And you can see that the footpath has a lot of issues. So even though it's wide, it has level differences and, you know, chaotic placement of the trees and other elements. And so people ended up walking in this cycle lane. So it didn't really work. So the city went back to the drawing board, like trying to learn from these mistakes, and came back with a more contemporary design for protected bike lane. And this was on a corridor known as the Jemo Lebu corridor. And with support from GDCI and other partners, the city implemented this tactical project to, you know, at a very reasonable budget, get something out there to test out the design and see how it would work. Now, based on that, the city found that it did succeed in increasing the cycle volumes, attracting new users. And so they went on to make it permanent by installing these concrete bollards. Yeah, and so that's, you know, it's continued to attract users, but it's still, you know, it's still it has some issues. You know, there are certain places where cars get in, and so the city's been trying to innovate further to see how to define these facilities so that they're more clearly differentiated from the roadway. And this is one of the more recent projects, this Bole-Gora Road. It goes past the Bole International Airport in the city. And so there you can see they've moved to having the fully separated cycle track typology, so that it's you know, clearly differentiated from the roadway, and hopefully we'll have fewer encroachments from parked vehicles.
Sorry, Chris, but just a small reminder to that we're a little bit over time, so maybe you can wrap it up so that we have some time for the Q&A as well. So just to maybe go through the next ones. Thanks.
We're just about there. Yeah, I'll just wrap up. So yeah, this is Churchill Avenue. It's one of the recent street upgrades in the city, which, you know, replaced the walkways and also built this wide bidirectional cycle track with good finishing in concrete. So besides these physical interventions, the city's been organizing regular car-free days, you know, helping transform a lot of streets to open them up for people. And then another key initiative that the city's starting up is the bike share project. So it's currently in the financial analysis phase, looking at how to set up the business model and, you know, and jumpstart the cycling culture. And just to conclude, one of the nice developments in Ethiopia has been the scale up. You know, so following the success of the Addis NMT strategy, the Ministry of Transport also prepared an NMT strategy at the national level, and it identified goals for the key secondary cities and how to scale up these measures across the country. And it's had strong political support. The Transport Minister chairs a national NMT steering committee that brings together the different agencies that are involved in the design and planning of the NMT environment, and they're helping to see how to, you know, bring good NMT facilities to all of the important towns and rural centers across the country. So with that, I'll wrap up, and we're happy to take any more questions. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Chris, especially for all those pictures that really help to get an idea of how, yeah, what the situation looks like in Kisumu and also in Addis Ababa. I think there's a question that was directed to Aimee that I think she could not answer in the quick Q&A part that we put in. It was about how to best communicate to decision makers what are the best arguments regarding car-free days. Aimee, maybe you want to answer that one.
One thing I just think about with car-free days is they're temporary. They're just like a day, a week, or a special time that you do something like that. So it minimizes the risk for decision makers. So you can say that this is a way to test out and see what the reception would be. I think there's so much documentation of the success of car-free days that I think you could bring that to decision makers, talking about how it's been done in so many cities. So you can use that as well. I think the other thing too is, and this is for me the most compelling reason, is it really is such a viscerally different experience of the city. So from my experience with the car-free day in New York City is, I can cycle there, and it's for the first time. That's the only time I cycle in Manhattan because I'm a scaredy cat. But the other thing is, like, it's quiet, it's pleasant. Like, it's amazing how much the noise of motorized vehicles and the pace of motorized vehicles can really be intense. So being able to experience your city in a very different way helps build, like, if a decision maker wants to do more walking and cycling, this helps build political will from the public. So I think that you can frame it that way. But Addis has also been doing these car-free days every month. So I don't know, Chris, if you have a sense of how they started it and what was the catalyzing argument that got them to get on board with it.
Yeah. I think initially it was in large part the health benefits and the idea of giving people a space to exercise. A lot of neighborhoods in the city don't have access to open spaces within walking distance, and so this was a great way to create this instant public space. And I think that's also been a driving factor in Kigali. And you see a lot of people out there jogging and and biking and getting their exercise. So that's been a big draw.
Great, thank you very much for that. And then there's also a question in the chat. I think it's directed to Chris. If you think that without the SUMP, that the Kisumu project would still have happened, or is it mainly because of the SUMP that it was implemented?
No. So in fact, the city began work on the NMT planning even as the SUMP was under preparation. So I think it's not a don't wait for the plan. Build the facilities. What it really did was help to catalyze momentum behind the SUMP, because once the footpaths were out there, then more the stakeholders saw the rationale for investing in this. And then besides the work that the city's doing with this World Bank finance, one of the road agencies in Kenya also came forward and offered to do a more detailed NMT network plan and also do designs for certain NMT corridors. And and it's been attracting other counties to come and visit the facilities. So yeah, I think it's really important to get something moving and and capitalize on the political support that can generate.
Okay, thank you very much. There's another question in the chat regarding how Addis is planning on paying for this, but maybe regarding, if you look at the time, maybe you can just answer it in the chat. Maybe, I hope it's a quick answer, maybe. And then we can move on to our next speaker in the meantime.
I mean, just very briefly, like what the main ways. So the city's been investing a lot of its own money because Addis has a strong tax base. They have property taxes where they can do a lot of these projects with their own funding. But now the Ministry of Transport's in active discussions about mobilizing more finance from African Development Bank and other partners to scale it up. So I think it's important to look at all sources.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, let's move on to another exciting case study from a totally different region or part of the world. Vincent Licher from Suez Consultancy is going to share his experience on the work in Kochi with the Green Mobility Corridor or the North-South Mobility Corridor. I think we decided to share your slides, so I will ask my colleague to put them up, please, Julia. And you can either take over control or you can just say next slide and we will move on for you. Julia,
Okay,
we did it.
I will leave you the control. Maybe it's safer, easier. Thank you for the opportunity given to me to share this project that we designed last year in Kochi. So next slide, please. Coming. It's a study that we made for the Kochi Municipal Corporation within Mobilize Your City, implemented by the French Development Agency with the support of the European Union. And we made it with a local think tank, the Center for Public Policy Research based in Kochi. Next. Kochi is a city at the south of India. The population is about 2 million, and we are here we see a part of the city center. There is a metro line in Kochi that we can see on the picture. And there are also two main railway stations that we can see on the left and on the right. And the railway line is running in between along a stretch where there is also a major bus terminal, KSRTC, as we can see, and there is a major hospital also. And a lot of people are actually going along this corridor while there is no real road, actually. It's a kind of a isolated or landlocked area, while it is actually part of the city center. You see MG Road on the bottom of the picture, 600 meters from there. This is really the city center. But when you go in this place, you see that it seems not to be connected with the rest of the city. So the main objective was to open this area. Next, please. Some pictures of the place. You see the railway line. You see there is a drain running along the railways, and in some places it is covered by concrete slabs, sometimes not. In some places you have a road, either a dirt road or sometimes a paved road. But in other places you have no room actually, and people and you have pedestrians actually walking on the railway tracks, which is absolutely unsafe. Next. So it's a project of urban mobility, but much more than that. There is this goal of improving the connectivity, so creating or improving links between the bus terminal, the railway and metro stations. There is a stadium also, the hospital. The links were to be developed with the city center, and also the project is seen as a way to relieve the congestion on parallel roads. But there is also a component of urban management, improving safety and security for all, cleanliness, better control and surveillance by authorities. It's a place that is impossible to manage today because there is no access, and improvement of the drains. And more widely, inclusion in the city, step by step, turning this somewhat backyard area into a lively urban space, including social and economic activities. And the goal of the project is to solve these several problems with one solution. Next. So the project was developed with 4 components. The first one was really non-motorized transportation, so what we call the green corridor, adapted to walking and cycling. In parallel to that, there was the idea of developing electric rickshaw services. Auto rickshaws are a large part of the transportation system today in Kochi. But there are already some e-rickshaws as the ones we see. So the idea was to develop also a corridor that could be adapted to e-rickshaw services. Third component, development of hubs and connections to the city centers. So connection between the corridor and perpendicular roads, and then development of social and commercial activities along the area. Next. The study lasted for about 6 months. We began with data collection, well, classically, site reconnaissance, topographic survey, some mobility surveys too. So we made counts of vehicles, of pedestrians, and also some interviews of people to understand the origin and destinations, the purpose of the trips, the expectations, the problems. And we also surveyed the land ownership along the corridor. Based on that, we made an urban and mobility diagnosis that helped refine the objectives of the project. There are, as always, when this kind of city is launched, there are already objectives, of course, but the diagnosis helped to have a clearer idea of what should be the target of the project. So this first part lasted about 3 months, and then 3 more months to develop the mobility improvement plan and evaluate it. Next. We proposed some design principles. So as much as possible, we tried to develop the project in the existing right-of-way, because one of our objectives was that it could be implemented rapidly, and land acquisition and so on are always everywhere something complicated. So we tried to find a solution that was fully adapted to the existing situation of the corridor. Universal access, even for disabled or people with disabilities. Materialization of limits. We don't like fences too much, but there are some contexts where they are useful. And when you are along a heavy rail infrastructure, it's better to have clear limits and some fences. Develop vegetation, alignment of trees. Today there are already magnificent trees along the corridor. So as we saw previously in Kenya, we tried really to maintain all these trees and highlight them and use them in the design. Develop lighting, and beyond lighting, a real proposal, an illumination plan that is not only the functional utility of light, but it is also a way of creating an atmosphere and something nice in the area. And developing multi-service wood structure with the same kind of design. So they are just example. It's not constructed already, but the idea is to have an identity, a visual identity along the line, and along the corridor, and having the structure for shops, services, toilets, technical utilities. Next. In some places, we have room enough to create plazas and incorporate some shops and develop public spaces. And next slide, we see other places where it is much more narrow, and when we just need to develop a safe and convenient pathway, as we see the before and after pictures here. Next. Okay, an extract of the illumination plan, just to, well, we propose a combination of lights on light poles and lights on the ground, and at ground level, to highlight the various areas along the corridor. Next. When it comes to evaluation, we were based on our surveys. We tried to estimate the future frequentation, or let's say ridership of the area, and it would be formed in majority by former non-motorized transportation users, pedestrians and cyclists. but also from former auto rickshaws users, a small part from private vehicle or cab users, and then what you call induced demand, people who, who would not have moved if there was no corridor, then if it was not developed. So the frequentation is estimated is 11,000, sorry, which is not so much at the city level, but it's along 2.5 kilometers. So it's it's quite a lot for the size of the area, and all the more if you consider the number of people that would be impacted by the corridor, 20,000 people living within 500 meters of the corridor, about 30,000, including people having daily activities. And we also estimated the numbers of vehicle kilometers transferred from motor vehicle to green modes, and then the quantity of CO2 emissions saved every year. Next. And beyond these quantitative impacts, of course, it's also about comfort, safety, security, urban quality, landscape, because everybody wants to live in a nice city. So it's also the economy, the image of the city. It's a city where tourism is important, and it could also improve the attractiveness of the city center. Next. A short video that we made. Maybe you need to click just to begin it. It's a very schematic 3D model, just to fit inside our budget. Can you click on the arrow, or maybe I can do it? Okay. But it helped to show what was the project. So it's interactive model, and we made this video just to show. So here you have an example of a public space that is developed. Of course, if you know the present condition of the place, you understand maybe better what changing means. And here we see in light yellow the pedestrian and cycling lane, and in orange the e-rickshaws that are running. In some places, the e-rickshaws would drive along the Nmt corridor, and in some other places they will use a street that is somewhere else. So next. What about the project today? So it has been reviewed and updated by the technical department of the municipal corporation. They have complemented the surveys, and now they are about to launch the next stage of the project as per Indian regulations, which is called the detailed project report for further implementation. And I hope it will go all the way and be implemented rapidly, because actually the project is quite simple. And just a short message, and also it's about the question of the barriers. Mobility is often seen as an issue of vehicles, and it's not easy to convince decision makers that it is worth spending money on people who walk or cycle. It might seem not so serious, not so important, while actually these projects are very cost effective. And we saw a slide before where we see actually even the transport capacity, the number of people how it is also very efficient in terms of space in the city. And the various statistics about the proportion of trips in a city that are less than 2 kilometers or 3 kilometers or so. And the potential is huge, actually, everywhere. So the message is, do not disregard active mobility projects. And we see also in many places, I see, for example, in African cities, when we talk of cycling, people say, "Wow, people will never cycle here. It's not possible." While actually it seems so obvious from outside that there is a huge potential. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Certainly also very, very insightful and interesting. I think it's especially so fascinating because it really shows that people are actually already walking in these environments, even though it's alongside a railway, it's not very safe. So it really makes sense to consider active mobility there because it is already there and there's just no infrastructure here. I think that's a perfect example that showcases this. There's some time now for questions. So if you have them, feel free to post them in the chat. Meanwhile, I also have a question, because I feel like these estimations that you showed of how many people might be using this corridor, they are very relevant also if you want to convince people to build this, to implement this project. And I was wondering, I can imagine that based on the diagnosis that you did alongside the corridor, you can estimate how many people that are currently using it are going to continue to use it. But how did you go along estimating how many people might switch, for example, to the modes there? Like, how did you do that?
It was mostly based on the declaration of people, kind of their intention, and then also the analysis of the origin and destination and the efficiency of the system. But to be frank, it was made at the spring of 2020, and I'm not sure of the details. I should check.
Okay, no, it's no problem. I think it's really good if you can communicate the benefits of such a product like that in that way, like how many tons of CO2 are going to be saved and this kind of things.
And actually, to be frank, also nobody knows, but it's a potential, and it can be much more. Maybe if it depends also of the activities that can be developed along the corridor, because in some places there you can imagine to make a music festival, or it can be maybe not 11,000 but 100,000. I know. It has to be. It's not decided yet.
Yeah, for sure.
It will depend how the city will organize things, to the city and also the society, and then everyone will take ownership of this place and make it as a vibrant and lively place.
Yeah, for sure. There's always potential for more there. And I will certainly make sure to follow up on how this proceeds. It's such an interesting project, and I'm really glad that you were here to present it. I see that there are no other questions coming up, and also with looking at the time, I promised that also there's some time for the interactive part and looking at the solutions. So I'm going to ask you to go back to the board if you want to participate in sharing your ideas and solutions. Of course, Aimee, Chris, and Vincent, you're invited to also come back to the plenum, turn your camera on again, and also take part in the exchange. And everybody of you can also, of course, share their insights by raising a hand and speaking up. You don't have to use the board, but if you want to use the board, again, the explanation, you can either use the link that we are going to post in the chat, or you can just scan the QR code, and then once again, you have to make sure that you are going to the fourth question this time, otherwise you will be stuck with the barriers, and that would be very unfortunate. So make sure to click on the fourth question, and maybe we can also, Julia, maybe you can take us to the board and we can see if there are some solutions that already are coming in. Oh, I see there's some car park restrictions. Okay, that's certainly something that might be relevant. Maybe Chris or Aimee, you can share some insights on how you, I think the bollards that you place along the cycle paths are some kind of these car park restrictions, but maybe there are some other insights that you have for this solution, like how it can actually be implemented? Is it like putting up signs, or are there other ways as well?
I think the first thing you want to do is make it by design. So bollards are really important. But I do want to just put an interesting plug in here. India is working on this thing called the Healthy Streets program, which I think is a super cool way to think about bringing walking and cycling to the forefront of how you plan streets, grounding it in health. But the other component of it is car parking management and on-street parking management. A lot of times people say, oh, the curb is chaotic, we can't add more space for walking and cycling or even transit because there's just too much chaos in the curb, and we need to really have more parking, more space for cars. A lot of time that's because it's mismanaged. So if there's a way to manage your curb better, manage your on-street parking better, I think that also helps. I don't know if Chris or Vincent want to add anything.
Yeah. No, that's it. Yeah. Parking management's key, but not neglecting the actual physical enforcement. So in Addis, the traffic management agency has a goal of installing some thousands of bollards every year. So they're going across the city, wherever there are footpaths that are unprotected, they're putting up bollards to surround the whole area to make sure that cars can't get on. So yeah, it's really key. Like even if you have a parking management system, it's good to have that physical enforcement to really protect the space.
Yeah, certainly very important. Another thing that came up on the board that was also something that I maybe learned today, or that was very interesting, is this greening of active transport infrastructure. I think sometimes it's not even like greening, it's like keeping the green there. Aimee also highlighted it in the chat that it's great that to keep old trees there. I think it's maybe not only for, of course, it's important for climate change reasons, and but also for the local climate, but also just for having a nice environment. I mean, you don't have to build like other nice street design if there's already a really nice tree there that encourages people to walk.
I'm a huge fan of the idea of green infrastructure. I think we need to be thinking about this. Our streets are going to be the spaces where we have the flexibility to do anything about it. If we're concerned about like extreme weather, whether it be rain, trees help with mitigating the flooding potential. It's really cool if you ever get a chance to watch videos about how trees deal with rainfall. It's super interesting. You also have things like extreme heat. And there's also equity things that happen with the green spaces, where green spaces are primarily in wealthy areas. So if you're concerned about equity, you need to be thinking about greening your city, especially in low-income areas where it's hotter and more polluted. They help clean the air. They help create a better environment. And so I think and it's also mental health too. Like I think we need to bring nature back into the city instead of having this kind of bifurcation between nature and urban. Because I think for mental health reasons, we need to do it. So I'm a huge fan of it.
Yeah, and it's really key to think about functional landscaping, so that's why we're advocating for trees, like not just planting grass or flowers or palm trees that don't have a canopy so they don't give any shade, like actually having, trees that provide shade to cool the spaces. And especially if you're working in a city that has a hot, humid climate, then it's really critical to maintain the tree cover that you have, go the extra mile to get the trees into the topographic survey, make that one of the requirements when you give out the TOR for a street improvement project, and then make sure that your designers and contractors, look at how to incorporate those trees and, and don't just cut them all down because it's the easy way out.
Yeah, also Matteo added in the chat that they're also housing for birds, so that also makes us happier. That probably adds to it's of course also an issue of biodiversity, but also people who just enjoy biodiversity. And yeah, that's certainly one very relevant solution. I see that there are also other ones popping up as well. This question of financing is certainly one that we might not be able to cover or find a solution for in 3 minutes that are left, but it's something I think, Chris, you also mentioned it already, how the financing worked in Addis Ababa, and I think that's certainly crucial. But then also what Vincent shared for the Kochi case is simply that financing active modes is so much more cheaper than financing other modes of transport, not just cars, but also public transport is also still more expensive. So I think it's really worth to think about how to get more like effective funding solutions. I don't know if you have like other examples there that you could share, Aimee, Chris, or also like.
Well, and so often our ongoing projects already, have a lot of backing, and so it's just a matter of making sure that when we're upgrading key road corridors through our cities, that we design them as complete streets with, with a space for active mobility and tree cover and everything, rather than just designing them as urban highways. So oftentimes the money is there, and it's just a matter of, tweaking the design to make sure that we get the right output.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think Lisa Bender from Minneapolis told the story how she used to be an advocate fighting for a cycle lane here or there. But what really you need to do, like, and that's fine, but if you want to have it be as of right, kind of, so that you have a complete streets policy, so that when you do the upgrading, when you do the maintenance, that's kind of the basis from which you start, instead of having to try to force it in there with your traffic engineers who may be more concerned about civil traffic throughput. I think the other thing I like to say this is that budgets are a reflection of values. And so just making sure that your normal budget has that and has those allocations in there shows what you value. I mean, it ends up like on the street, you see what you prioritize, you see what you value, but like really working on thinking through, like Pune did a really interesting thing where they allocated a certain percentage of their budget for sustainable mobility. I think that's, again, making a value decision or a policy decision at the beginning instead of at the end.
Yeah, and having that framework, in the network plan or in a mobility plan makes the projects much more bankable, because when development banks are looking at whether to fund these things, they want to see that due diligence has been completed. And so if you have those plans, set out already, then there's a lot less homework that you need to do to make the case to mobilize that finance.
Hey, thank you so much. There are other solutions there as well. Also some that I noted down from your presentation, from the presentation of Vincent. So yeah, there's sure still a lot to be done. Thank you, Julia, for sharing the board. I think we can go back for the closing to have us all in full screen. Just a few words before I'm going to end the session. As I said earlier, this is the last session of the Mastering Mobility Month, the last topic that we covered. If you participate in the session or in other sessions, you can get a certificate of participation, but you can only get that if you answer the survey that we are going to post and if you take part in the quiz. So it's really not that hard, that quiz, but it's just a fun little experience after having been in the session. So my colleague is going to post that. So you can take part in that. And even if you don't want to get the certificate of participation, I still encourage you to take part in the feedback survey, because it, of course, also helps us to further develop these sessions and to keep on growing for these trainings. It's the last session of the Mastering Mobility Month, but of course there are always new trainings and events that will come up next year. So if you want to stay updated on what we are doing as Mobilize Your City partnership, you need to register to our newsletter, and then you will be always up to date. And all presentations of the Mastering Mobility Month are also online, so you can use the link that my colleague is also going to share in the chat. There will be a lot of links for you. So you can use that link to access them, and also all the other sessions. So with that being said, thank you very much for your participation in the session. Thank you for the questions, sharing the thoughts and ideas on the board. The board is still open if you want to add anything there. And then, of course, thank you very much for our three speakers. Thank you, Aimee. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Vincent, for sharing your knowledge and experience. That was certainly very interesting. So thank you all for joining. I hope I will see you soon again, maybe in some upcoming events, and goodbye.